Okay, so again, there's a little stopgap between videos. It's time for another one of these quality versus quantity things, and in light of the fact that Dwarven Domination was likely to set in a little bit early if I had picked the Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithran as I was going to, we're instead going to have a look at the Nazg-Hai Bodyguard. Now, individually these guys are exceptionally strong, but there aren't very many of them, only 37, so they may have 4 hit points and very exceptional stats, but the very small unit size is likely to mean they probably won't even be victorious, let alone really challenge the likes of the Mithril Guard, so I'm expecting this to be a bit of a cautionary tale in how smaller units can be overwhelmed even by garbage. But we shall see. And again, I would like to do a few more larger battles, as I have indicated, but recently I've been doing a couple of scenarios, but they weren't finished, so it didn't really make much sense to show them, lest you show something that isn't representative of the finished product. Although, to be honest with you, the last little scenario we did was called Thorn Settlement, and that one was very good. It seems like that one's actually finished, so perhaps I could have shown that, but still, better safe than sorry. Don't want to be showing someone's work that isn't quite finished. I don't want to do them the disservice of that. But it's a very good custom scenario if you find yourself playing that one. Dwarven and Elven defense against all of the Orc factions, one of each. Very fun indeed. But then the Nazg-Hai Bodyguard, let's have a little talk about these guys, because I have indicated in the past that I think that these guys are very strong, and they are really a hybridization of shock and heavy infantry, because they are essentially Nazg-Hai with shields, a little bit more defensive in nature. Although as a bodyguard unit they do have less in the unit. It's very much a case of, I would consider these guys to be a sort of Diet Nazgul, if that makes sense. Of course, the Nazgul, there are only 10 of them in the unit, and they have exceptional stats, but they are very liable, both now and in vanilla, to being overwhelmed quickly. And the Nazg-Hai are rather similar in the sense that if you send them alone to deal with something, they will be overwhelmed, but if you put them in with something lower, like Uruk-hai infantry in particular are a very good unit to put with them, because they're armoured and they're pretty survivable in and of themselves. You'll do a lot of damage with these guys. With the hit point sponge, they will be very difficult to kill off indeed, but if you can isolate them, things are pretty good. Now obviously, usually archers are actually a pretty safe bet against stuff like Nazg-Hai, because they don't have shields, but of course the shielded nature of the Nazg-Hai Bodyguard means that this isn't really the ideal way to deal with them. As I learnt when I tried to kill them off with Blacklock Engineers, if you support them, they're even pretty difficult to kill off with Blacklocks, and considering that they are very good at hunting down trolls and even lesser Balrogs, it just goes to show how important that hit point sponge can be. A lot of the Nazg-Hai though here are getting pretty badly tuned up, so this is going to be, I would imagine, not quite as terrible as the lesser Balrogs perform, but in the same sort of vein. I would not expect them to reach the top 5 just because the cliff for them is going to appear very rapidly. I mean, it will only take about 10 casualties at the most before they start to fall apart. Getting stun locked is very easy. Now of course we can see some breakage, but even so. So we will cut, and whether they reach the quarter waypoint or whether they lose, or whether they dip below 30 is when I will rejoin the action. So as you can see, they just hit 30 just before I was going to rejoin at the quarter point, so yeah, the Nazg-Hai are slowly fading, and this does go to show that even a unit that is exceptional in its own right is very liable to be swarmed if you don't use it correctly. Now of course it's not just larger sieges and scenario type battles that I want to be doing, because I still am doing the top 10 mid-tier infantry, and that is something which is quite difficult to do, honestly. I have been working on it, and there are several units which could qualify for it, and really I think it's come down to the criteria for being a mid-tier infantry. Wow, they just lost 3 in quick succession. But the criteria for being mid-tier is, I asked myself, could I build an army around this? Could this be the centre of my army with reasonable funds? So 13 to 15k, could you build an army with this in the middle of it? And there are several units which, for example, mid-tier for the High Elves would be the Mithlon Nobles, but the Mithlon Nobles, you can only have 2 of them before the cost increases, and you can't really build an army around them. You know, they're good, but really the closest thing to a sort of centre to your army that the High Elves have a Sword Quindi, which is the lowest tier of infantry they have, yet it's not really low tier when you compare it to the Orcs, so it's a rather interesting balance you need to strike. But, you know, I am working on that, and it's going to be interesting because there are several units, and a bit of a tip now, which I was told of, you know, in the recent scenario that I did, and I did know of this before in the sense that I knew they were pretty good for the price point, but I never really had the, well, it never really came up in conversation that I needed to let people know, and that is the Mordor Moranon units. So the big maulers essentially, and the halberds, and particularly the archers, are all very good value for money. If you play as Mordor, this is the, despite the fact that usually Mordor relies a little bit more on having a lot of low tier and then some hyper high tier units, this is a sort of mid tier of Mordor, which as it stands is very, very cost efficient, in particular the archers, although I do believe the archers will probably be changed at some point. So if you want to play Mordor, then for the near future at least, the Moranon units are a very, very safe bet. And it's also why I'm kind of hesitant to include the Moranon Uruks in the mid-tier infantry list, because they would certainly make it if I didn't think they might be nerfed in the near future. It's possible, just because I'm not really sure that having a very strong and cost-efficient mid-tier is something that Mordor should necessarily have, considering what I believe their focus should be, which is a lot of trash augmented by a few very, very high-tier units. But we'll see. Mordor have always been a very interesting faction to play as, in the sense that horde tactics, a bit of Zerg rushing. It's been a while since I played StarCraft 2. I was always a big fan of the Zerg in StarCraft 2. For some reason I always got my ass handed to me by Protoss, but there you go. Back to Third Age. The Nazg-Hai Bodyguard are still fighting, and they're still going pretty strong, all things considered. They don't have many left in the unit. The Nazg-Hai actually do have a decent amount of mass to them, so they won't crumble quite as quickly as some standard units, but the cliff is approaching rather rapidly. I do love the look of the Nazg-Hai, both the Bodyguard and the two-handers. I think I prefer the two-handers, honestly. A nice giant sword, but the shielded variety is certainly the safer place for your general. Those block chances against missiles, very, very useful. And yes, I'm hoping to, I know that I said I was going to show Lothlorien. The next battle that I do, I hope to show either Lothlorien or Khand. It really depends on what map I do, because I was thinking of doing Dol Guldur and being on the defence, in which case I would play as Khand. Playing as Khand on the defence is going to be a rather interesting one, considering their infantry is not stellar at holding the line, but we'll see how I do there. And Lothlorien have their own problem as well, which is a bit of a lack of armour, but they make up for it in other ways. We'll see. But yes, here we can see the Nazg-Hai, and again I'll make a little cut, and I can imagine that they won't make it to the halfway point, so it will be when they dip below the 10 mark, and then we'll see their last stand. I didn't have to wait long. They're down to 9, and the stun locking can commence. So again, this is what would happen to the Nazgul as well, if you're wondering, to an even greater extent, because there is significantly less of them. You need to embed them with another unit if you're going to be aggressive with them. And being aggressive with the Nazg-Hai Bodyguard is, oh, there goes the general, is very, very possible, because they do have very strong attack stats. We can also see like the banner carriers of berserkers, or at least several of the officers. So yes, this is a little warning. Don't expect some of your really high tier, sort of low unit model units to just be able to hold against everything forever. I mean, this is the worst unit 1v1 in the game. And yes, it took quite a few of them to get through, but if this was a half-decent unit, you know, a couple of half-decent units against one, so say something like Lasanak Nobles, a couple of them could really hamper the Nazg-Hai Bodyguard, especially if they were under archer fire as well. Which is very possible, because when you're playing an Orc faction, the first thing that I do when I'm playing against an Orc faction is, what is the high tier stuff that they've got? What's the scary stuff? So Misty Mountains with their blackbacks, Isengard with the Nazg-Hai, Mordor with whatever trolls or temple inquisitors they brought, that sort of thing. Because that's the target you want to go after. The sort of standard garbage is really the thing that they will do, is they'll try and flank around you with their numbers, but sort of 1v1 you don't really have to worry about them as much. With Isengard maybe a little more, because their mid tier is pretty damn good. But these are the sorts of units you want to kill off. If you can kill them off, you've really got an advantage on the field, especially in something like a siege, where these are the sorts of units that are really going to push the enemy through your gates. If you can kill them off, you know, trash is not going to do the job. If you try and force your way through with just trash, you're just going to end up getting them killed, and then they're going to rout. Only 3 remaining. The Nazg-Hai Bodyguard do get a point for style, though. The folk of the ring, I believe, is what Nazg-Hai actually translates to. At least that's what I was told. Because I believe in the Divide and Conquer campaign, the way to actually unlock the Nazg-Hai as Isengard is to obtain the One Ring if you're playing as Saruman. So that's pretty nice. It's a pretty nice touch. And rightly so. They're a very scary unit. Trolls of the White Hand are also pretty good for Isengard. A lot of people have complained that Isengard don't necessarily have the best high tier stuff, and that their mid tier isn't quite good enough to make up for that. I kind of agree, but there are ways to make the Isengard work. I think the pikes and the crossbows combination that they've always had, and this carries across into Reforged, is something the other orcs just don't have. You know, the Misty Mountains can deploy crossbows of their own, but it's much more efficient to use it as Isengard, and the crossbows, you know, the danger is real. Especially as I learnt, much to my dismay as the dwarves in Thorn Settlement. Uruk-hai crossbows strong. Gotta defuse them. And when you back that up with scary units like this, and some fodder like Dunland Clansmen, if you use them right, I think they're pretty good. Maybe like one unit they're missing. One nice high tier unit, perhaps. We'll see. These 3 are lasting for a good long time though. In fact, as soon as these guys dip below 70, actually I'm just going to speed it up now to +2. Got to keep an eye on these guys. We've got the Berserker over here with his big 2-hander. The best defense is a good offense, and vice versa. It's a bit of a paradox, but there you go. And these guys just aren't falling. They've got some staying power, I'll give them that, but they're not going to make the halfway point. Not a cost-effective way to use the Nazg-Hai. Well, where are these guys? Oh, it looks like there's still 3 of them. Oh. Well, there we go. Okay, let's speed it up to 6. This next unit is surely gonna finish them off. The last stand. There's still 3 of them left alive, but now with a whole fresh unit of fodder, I think that's it. They fell pretty quickly when they came in. So 1,138 kills from, in terms of individual unit models, one of the strongest units in the game. But cost effective in this sort of situation, they are not. It's the same sort of fate that met the lesser Balrogs, to a slightly lesser extent of course, and it would be the same fate that would meet the Nazgul. So yeah, not a terrible performance all things considered. It could have gone a lot worse for them, considering they started off with a low amount of men in the unit. Because this is the sort of a level of men that the Mithril Guard and the Haven Guard both finished with, and the Dalian Paladins, so they're already off to a losing start really. But that is the Nazg-Hai Bodyguard. Of course, this will be a sort of series that keeps ticking over whenever there's a bit of a gap between like big sieges and top 10s that I'm able to show, and it does at least show the limitations of certain types of units in this case. So I hope this was somewhat informative and somewhat cautionary in a way not to use your hyper high tier units. And I hope you'll join me for the next video, which will probably be another online battle, to be honest with you. I might need a little more time. Might need to get a second opinion on the top 10 mid-tiers, honestly, because it's a little bit tricky to sort of sort out what's what. But I hope you'll join me for whatever's next.